So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Welcome everyone today's webinar. My name is Majda Anwar. I will be your host before I turn it over to our wonderful speakers. Couple of house things to talk about. Number one, if you have questions, feel free to put them into the chat. We'll be fielding those questions for Dr. Debbie and Kevin. Second, we will have a poll, so we do encourage interaction and questions. If you have, that'll come up early in the session so we can set the stage for the webinar. And number three, this recording and the slides will be available to everyone who registered. We're probably about 48 hours or 2 business days after today. So see that early next week. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. I am very excited to introduce both Dr. Debbie Qaqish and Kevin Joyce, co-authors of our white paper, the Revenue Marketing Center of Excellence, which is the topic for this webinar. Dr. Debbie is a partner and Chief Strategy Officer at the Podowitz Group, and Kevin is our VP of Engagement Management. Dr. Debbie has published 2 books. Her most recent book, From Backroom to Boardroom, is an Amazon bestseller, and also authored The Rise of the Revenue Marketer, which we'll talk about revenue marketing in a little bit. Both Kevin and Dr. Debbie have published across many publications within the B2B marketing field, so I'm very excited to go ahead and turn this over. And with that, Dr. Debbie, let's go ahead and take a look at the agenda.
Okay, great. Thank you, Majda. Well, Kevin and I had a really fun time putting this agenda together. And the reason we decided to do this webinar is the Revenue Marketing Center of Excellence is our most downloaded white paper of every asset that we have. And it's been that way for years. So we thought, let's put a webinar around it and talk about what's new, what's changed, and what you can look forward to in revenue marketing COEs. So we'll do a poll and we'll get to know you a little bit better why you're here. We'll talk about the drivers for creating centers of excellence. We'll give you some basics, Revenue Marketing 101, Centers of Excellence 101, and then we'll talk about types of centers of excellence. And then in the third section, we'll explore more assets of a revenue marketing COE. We'll take a look at key elements, a sample, vision, and mission. We actually have 4 distinct centers of excellence that Kevin and I are going to talk you through, and that's going to be probably where we'll spend most of our time is just talking about these case studies, so you'll have some good takeaways. And then we'll also talk about common barriers, because it's not always easy to establish a COE. And then we'll do some next steps and give you a best practices approach for getting going. So let's go.
So let's get the poll going.
So here's the poll. Why is a revenue marketing center of excellence of interest to you? 1, is it to drive more revenue? 2, is it to address talent challenges? 3, is to modernize your marketing capability? Or 4, learn how to build a center of excellence? Or is it 5, all of the above? So the poll should be coming up, and we should be hearing from you guys, what's of interest to you today? And please select one. So it could be all of the above, or it could be just one of those in that set that we've got there.
Yep, and everyone should see a window pop up that says quick poll. Why is a revenue marketing COE center of excellence of interest to you?
And it's one of those things that, quite frankly, we don't know why people download the white paper. Is it because they want to learn more about revenue marketing? Is it because they want to learn more about how to build a COE? Or is it both of those combined? So this will also be helpful for us as well. And then you get to see what your colleagues on today's webinar, what they're thinking as well.
All right, Dr. Debbie, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. We've got a majority who have answered here. And then we should be able to share the results. So can everyone see the results of the poll?
Interesting. To modernize the marketing capability was 20%, 40% how to build a COE, and then 40% all of above. Thank you. That's really going to help Kevin and I further guide and personalize this webinar just for you.
Okay, we're back. Looks like it swapped screens on me, which is interesting.
It was an interesting
But
kind
we'll
of technology day, Kevin, right?
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about revenue marketing 101, Debbie.
Yeah, let's talk about revenue marketing. And again, it's a term that I think everybody has heard. It really is about transforming the role of marketing. And I am passionately interested in that. I'm a student of trying to understand what's happening in marketing. And when we work with clients, we hear things like, you know, Debbie, Kevin, can you help us move from being the pens and mugs department to a data-driven business unit? Or we're tired of being just the sales support team. We need to be a revenue partner. Or, you know, we're just the event producers, but we need to be revenue predictors. And finally, how do you move from being a cost center to a revenue center? This is incredibly important. The notion of marketing driving revenue is incredibly important. And look at some of these stats that were published late last year from the CMO Council. 71% of CMOs now have a quota, and they've assigned that accountability to their teams. 63% of marketing organizations say they're under very high to extreme pressure to deliver revenue, yet only 53% are moderately confident or worse that they'll meet their revenue targets. And 57% thinks that their CO is only moderately or worse satisfied with marketing performance. So there's incredible amount of pressure for marketing to perform in terms of revenue. At the same time, we're drowning in all of these enabling technologies that should make these a slam dunk. Next slide. So let's take a look at how we define revenue marketing. And we created this term and we've been using it since around 2010. But for us at TPG, revenue marketing is defined as transforming marketing from a cost center to a repeatable, predictable, and scalable revenue machine, of course, through digital transformation and the acceleration of customer centricity. And all of those things come into play when we think about how we define revenue marketing. So now that we have a baseline for revenue marketing, Kevin, why don't you give us a baseline for a center of excellence? What does that mean?
Happy to do that. You know, so Gartner gave us this quote some years ago, you know, a physical or virtual center of knowledge, concentrating the expertise and resources in a discipline or capability to attain and sustain world-class performance. And I want people to notice that there's two pieces to that. There's the concentration, the centering, and then there's the excellence, because as you'll see in some of our examples, people do the concentration, they don't always do the things that are required to drive excellence. And so we created this some time ago, and on the left-hand side, you see in this a lot of the things that are actually centered, and on the right are all the things that go in there to try and make things excellent. So, you know, centric, great, I'm going to bring people together. I'm going to very narrowly define the set of things that they're going to get, the inputs. I'm going to narrowly define and the outputs of what they're going to do. So it's like I'm building a factory. I'm going to define how loose, how much customization they can do versus how rigid they are in what they produce. Let's say I build a campaign COE. Are they only going to build very specific types of campaigns? I'm going to figure out how I get competitive advantage by doing a center of excellence. What's the whole point of doing it to begin with? Is it to drive efficiencies? On the right-hand side are the things that you would think about in terms of driving towards excellence. How do I do continuous improvement? How do I capture best practices? How do I measure it every single month so that we get better and better? So all of these things come together to form a COE.
And Kevin, the one I love on the right-hand side is the maniacal pursuit of excellence in the delivery of business outcomes. I love that phrase.
Yeah, and that's totally the point. Otherwise, you're just organizing a group, whether they're virtual or physical. It's like, call it a group. Don't call it a COE because it's a handy buzzword. You're going to make a COE, make a COE. So the types of COE, I mean, at the third one here, marketing operations COE, that's everything. That you're taking the whole marketing demand generation function.
Well, the revenue marketing is the
revenue marketing.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But, you know, some firms we've seen have narrowed it down and said, hey, I'm just going to do a campaign COE, or I'm going to do a marketing ops COE. So they'll take just those people related to those functions and build a center of excellence around them, meaning they'll define the inputs, the outputs, the team that's in there, the mission, the vision, and how they measure it and drive them towards excellence.
And so, Kevin, another COE that we're beginning to see, if we can just go back one slide, and we didn't put it on here, is a RevOps COE. And that's where you take marketing ops, sales ops, and customer success ops, and you put those into a single organization. So that's an area that's very exciting right now and very fast moving, and an incredible amount of growth there as well.
Good point, Debbie. Okay, so let's talk about what it takes to do a revenue marketing COE. So, I mean, as you would expect, right, it's going to be all the things we've talked about in revenue marketing for years: the strategy, the people, the process, the results, the technology, the process. All of those things are part of building a COE. In particular, when you build a COE, you're going to start with what's the mission, what's the vision, where are they going to go? You're going to try and figure out, are people going to move, or are they going to be virtually mapped in there? Is it a virtual COE?
If I could just add to that, Kevin, you know, it's so interesting whenever we go in and either someone already has a COE or they're building one, they really struggle with that vision and mission. It's like it's an afterthought for them. At the same time, once they have that in place, we see them really unified around something, and they really do much better. This is where the excellence comes into play.
I'm glad you bring that up. You know, I've been a big fan of the Fred Tuchman paper many years ago about how great teams succeed, right? And he was the one who coined the expression forming, storming, norming, and performing, right? And so the norming is all about defining the roles, the mission and vision, and then the roles. What are these people going to do? How are they going to interact with their stakeholders? What are those inputs? And so defining this, the people and the org and the structure is key. It's one of the reasons we're here today. But there's also, move on to processes. What are the processes? How are things going to be fed into them? How do they feed things out? How are these processes measuring, helping measure how well they're doing? All of those processes have to be defined. And we have one example where they focused almost entirely on the process. The COE was about the process more than anything else. Certainly, you have to think about what technology they need to do the job. It's kind of like building one of those big semiconductor fab plants, and you have to put all of the technology in before the very first day and then start to drive all the dust out, and nothing else goes in. Well, in building your COE, you have to put all of that technology in to empower these people. Obviously, you want to talk about the customer, but it's not your company's customer. It's who's the customer of the COE. What product are they producing? How do those requests come in? What's that process? How do they ship out, deliver, whatever it is they're going to deliver? How do they set up service level agreements? So if I have field regional marketing putting in requests, how soon can they expect a campaign or a data segment or something to come out of that COE? Obviously, the outputs and the scope and the service level agreements. And lastly, the measurement. You're not going to get to excellence without measuring it, right? Don't expect what you don't inspect. We have to have measurement, and it's got to be done at the cadence that you make decisions. Monthly decisions, you measure monthly. Daily decisions, you measure daily.
And so, Kevin, as we take a look at the key elements, and we also reflect on the answers that we had on the poll, and if you think about, you know, what do you think are the top 3 or 4 drivers? Why does somebody wake up one day and say, oh, we need to create a center of excellence? What do you think the drivers are?
You know, I think the first big driver that I see is chaos. In other words, there's a lot of things going awry, that things aren't organized, and they realize that either they're missing the process or missing the skills and capabilities in the team, and they have to get out of this chaos. It could be that their stakeholders are complaining, like your field marketing or your sales are saying, you're not giving us any campaigns, you're not doing any data cleanup, you're not organizing it, you're not enabling us. And they realize they have to build this quote factory. They have to build something that's predictable, produces predictable results, and it's measurable. And then the idea of driving towards excellence and making it better and better usually comes from organizations that want to scale. And they realize that they cannot scale the process. It's going to cost them an arm and a leg.
I agree. You know, and you and I work on a lot of the same accounts, and those are the kinds of things that we see. The other thing that I'll add to that is is, definition of crazy is doing the same thing the same way over and over, expecting a different result. And I think many marketing organizations are waking up to, they really have to change what they're doing. So this idea of having a maniacal focus, and again, I'll just come back to that. And the reason having a maniacal focus, and again, that's what a COE helps bring, because it's taking everything that's going on and it's just putting a laser light, a spotlight on this one thing that is important to get done, whether that's campaigns, marketing ops, revenue, whatever those things are. So I think that the notion of maniacal focus also fits very nicely with a center of excellence, and we see that as a driver.
It kind of takes you back to Adam Smith's, invisible hand. Remember all your basic economics, right? And so we're narrowing in and really making them focus so that they can drive up efficiency, productivity, and quality.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely.
Let's talk about a good vision and mission then, Debbie.
Yeah, so, we just, again, we see this in a lot of organizations. And so a sample vision would be for a revenue marketing COE, would to become a cutting edge revenue marketing organization fueled by a world-class center of excellence, serving as a growth engine and a driver of change. Likewise, the mission is about establishing and optimizing what we call RPS, repeatable, predictable, and scalable revenue processes that improve the customer experience, can amplify organizational efforts, and deliver on the business objectives. One of the critical elements of any COE is either bringing in people from different teams to a dedicated team, or enabling a cross-functional team to work together to scope, plan, develop, test, launch, and report on marketing's contribution to revenue and growth. The other reason this is super important is that I think everybody on the phone will say you're struggling with talent. Talent is such a big issue these days. It's kind of crazy. So I think the talent gap, or the chasm between the people that we need and the people that are available that have talent and skills, it just continues to grow. And so having a world-class COE, one that is using not just the latest technology to use the latest technology, but one that's really helping to drive a business forward, is also an excellent way to attract and retain the best talent, of course, to scale your business, and to be able to respond to customers and market changes. So there's a lot that goes into a COE. The promise of a COE is a pretty big promise. And again, we're going to take you guys through some examples of COEs. But if you can put that COE in place and you can drive for excellence, it makes a huge difference to the business.
So let's start with this one. Good example.
Okay. This is a really interesting company that I know quite well. And they're an HR software company. And I think they developed their first revenue marketing COE, I want to say maybe around like 2013. And they have continued to innovate since then. Now, at this company, let's take a look at what their challenges were. Let's take a look at the solution, and then let's also take a look at their results. So the challenge in this company, as it is with many software companies, is they were planning for year-over-year double-digit growth. By the way, that they have achieved that through the years, okay? And in that early environment, marketing is referred to as the arts and crafts department. They knew that they needed to get that one view of the customer across the entire customer journey so that they could figure out how to execute flawlessly at every customer touch point. They knew that there was a new way to drive revenue. It wasn't about feet on the street. You have to have that, but it's not the essential element. And they knew that they had to find a way to drive revenue in a customer-centric and an ever-increasingly digital world. And they also knew that they had to break down some legacy barriers. There was culture, structure, and functions that, quite frankly, were getting in the way. And as you develop any kind of COE, if it has a large promise versus a small promise, the larger it is, breaking down those legacy perceptions, thinking, roles, and responsibilities is a key change management element of instituting a COE. And then, of course, they had to have the systems and data, whatever they were going to do, and that was kind of in a mess as well. So this company actually did initially create a revenue marketing center of excellence. And we've had our Revenue Marketing Center of Excellence white paper out, I think, since around 2010, I want to say. So they used it as a quasi blueprint. And what they did was initially they combined marketing ops and sales ops under the CRO. They had a CRO who was a real visionary, who knew that marketing can't work in a silo from sales. Those two really had to work together. And so creating this initial structure where you had sales ops and marketing ops reporting into the CRO really helped create one team from there. They developed new roles and responsibilities based on creating this center of excellence, which was a dedicated, tangible organization. They mapped the customer journey. They aligned key technologies around that journey, and they developed a much stronger data and analytics capability. And everything was around creating that center of excellence for revenue marketing. And the results have been pretty incredible. Not only has the company done extraordinarily well, but marketing contributes over 40% of net new business, and that number continues to climb. And they have continued to reorganize, and they probably look a little bit more like a RevOps organization now than just a COE, but even a RevOps organization can be a COE. And I remember the very first time I interviewed their leader for the COE, and he talked about one view of the customer. He called it the line of sight. And I remember that interview. I just got chills from it because they knew they had to have that one view of the customer, because they needed to share customer insights and make sure that they're actionable, whether it was to sales or whether it was to marketing or whatever part of the organization needed it. They, as a result, were able to see sales and marketing act as a single team. So whenever sales has to present to the board, it's marketing and sales together presenting to the board. You know, they're working as a team. And it's also that one team that creates and drives strategy, technology, reporting, metrics, and analytics. And for marketing, this has done something very simple and very powerful. It has given credibility to marketing. They are now part of the revenue team, and the company recognizes they simply could not do it without marketing. So again, this is a really interesting company that I know well and have been following them for, gosh, probably since around, I don't know, 2013, 2012. And again, these were their challenges. This is the solution that they decided upon, and then the results have just been incredible for the organization. And again, if you guys have questions, just put them in the chat, and we will absolutely, Majda is monitoring the chat, and we'll make sure that we can answer those.
So the next one, I'll take this one, is a financial institution, campaign COE. So we've been working with this organization for a while, and it was very clear that they were in the chaos of campaigns. They had a lot of field offices that wanted campaigns. There was no predictability on when they'd get them, and the campaigns would be 10 ways to Sunday. They would all have just random requests. And so they realized they wanted to centralize the resources, and they were missing resources. Once they started to find what the COE was, they realized they didn't actually have all the capabilities, the skill sets. And they made a decision to insource a lot of them. They outsourced a couple of the smaller things, some of the creative, but they insourced a lot of them. So they had job descriptions. They went and hired and filled them. But the goal, or the challenge that they had really was the lack of predictability, and they were planning on growing, and they have grown. You know, measuring assets under management, they've grown remarkably.
It took so long. It took so long to get a campaign out the door. It was one of the most painful processes I've ever seen.
Yeah, and the quality of the campaigns also was variable quality. In other words, the results were sometimes great, sometimes not, and there was no real consistent way of measuring this stuff, so you could do apples to apples and say, what are we doing well? What are we not doing well? Which content are people engaging with? What are they not engaging with? So they realized that building a center of excellence would drive them towards the nirvana. What they wanted was predictable results that were ever improving.
Right.
So we worked with them to define what types of campaigns do you want to do, so that they could essentially have a menu that they could give to all their customers, their internal customers, to say, here's the menu of different campaigns you can do. And here's the SLA. Here's how long it's going to take. Here's what you have to give us in order to build these. Here's the value we will bring. So they defined all of that. They put all the people in place, and they started to roll it out. Obviously, they created it. One of the things they did I liked is they created the best practices library right off the bat as well. Because if you're going to get excellent, right, you have to keep some sort of track record of what's working, what's not working, and you've got to be able to share that with all your field marketing units so that they can pick up on the things that worked for other organizations and the things that didn't work. So they have certainly achieve success at the end of the day in upping the quality of the campaigns, doing more campaigns, by the way, in less time, being able to turn some simple campaigns in a very short amount of time. And that's, you know, depending on what industry you're in, but that becomes really important these days. If, let's say you're in the software security industry and there's a great big bug, some hackers have done something, there's no good blogging about that and having a campaign 3 weeks later. You need to do it within 48 hours while it's hot. And there are many industries that have that same issue. So we want to be able to do some campaigns in 2 days, which would seem like a miracle in most organizations. If you have a campaign COE, it's doable because you've built in, you have the processes, you've made a factory, and yes, they have to accept your definition of what a 2-day campaign is. You're not going to customize it to the ends of the world. That would take an extra week. The one thing I wish they could have done a little bit better was the focus on improvement, on excellence. I mean, they really were hell-bent on, let's define the factory, the process, but they didn't connect the feedback, the results back as strongly as I would have liked to really micromanage the quality and dial it up. But I suspect that will come over time.
And what's interesting about this company is that they have and still have an appetite for change, right? And so creating a COE, especially a COE that is pulling resources from various functions to work in the COE, but they still report into the function, can take a lot of effort. So from the top of the company down, there's a huge appetite for change. And like many organizations, you know, when they initially create a COE, what they need changes over time. And this particular company is also looking right now at creating a RevOps center of excellence across the organization. And again, one of the key drivers for that is just a better understanding and a better relationship with their customers because the world has become so digital.
Yep. Okay, Debbie, why don't you take the Tech Pharma one?
Sure. Yeah, this one was really interesting. And this was a straight up marketing ops center of excellence. So in this company, you know, what they were challenged with was they needed to create new solutions into new personas. So they needed to expand their product portfolio. They were pretty much, I wouldn't want to call them a one-trick pony, but there was just this one aspect of pharma supply chain that they did around the world, and they did it better than anybody. And that's just their bread and butter. But the appetite for growth at the executive level was very high. So they wanted to create new innovative solutions that would help revolutionize the whole supply chain for pharma. And it needs revolutionizing, everybody, let me tell you. And they would be selling these new solutions to new people. And so part of that was bringing in a new CMO who then understood that we can't do business the usual way. You know, what we have been very good at for so many years is still good for that, but for this other thing, we're going to need something totally different. And so what they really needed was to create a marketing operations center of excellence. And so they engaged us and we worked with a cross-functional team. So basically we came in, assessed where they were today on marketing operations. We took a look at where they needed to grow because there were going to be significant changes in the mix of activities that the marketing organization was now being responsible for. And part of that was twofold. Number one, creating a global ticketing system to manage intake and execution, as what Kevin was saying, you know, campaigns, but also to develop this capability offshore. They actually stood up, we helped them stand up a marketing operations center in India. So the strategic elements of the Center of Excellence were stateside and the doers, the worker bees, were in India. And so creating the Center of Excellence, creating the roles and responsibilities, creating a campaign roadmap, how you get a campaign created, and then also working with a various number of technologies to automate as much of that as possible was the solution that they took. Well, they had very interesting results. Very, very proud of them. This client met their annual revenue goals by adding 14 million from core compliance solutions and 6 million from the new value-based solutions, which was a big deal because, again, you just don't change a selling organization overnight. So that was actually a huge deal for them. Also, as a result of bringing a marketing ops capability or creating that marketing ops capability in-house, what they were able to do was to really understand these new personas better and faster than any other part of the organization. And so they were actually able to go to sales and they were able to go to product development and said, you know, we did this rapid fire testing. Here are the messages. Here are the pains that these people responded to. And so marketing really became very elevated in the eyes of the CEO during that time. And then, of course, you know, the campaign roadmap. And then, so they have been very, very successful with their marketing operations COE, and it really has helped marketing go from that pens and mugs department or that sales support department to really a revenue partner in that organization.
Nice. Okay, the last one I think we have is this very large multinational IT, and they wanted to build a campaign COE. This is a firm that has multiple huge marketing offices all around the world. And you can imagine that when you do that and you're deploying marketing campaign technology, that one of the big issues will be driving consistency. If you're in the brand group, of course, you want brand consistency, right? You want everything looking the same, but you also want to be able to have reusability of campaigns. And so they wanted to shift, of course, they were shifting everything from product focus to customer centric focus. And that required driving that messaging, positioning all over the world.
In a new way.
How better to, yeah, then try and centralize things for a while. Try and get a single central place where you're going to build all of this and roll it out. And that way, all those remote offices and everything have to put the requests in, and you drive that consistency, you drive that shift. And so that was one of the big goals. I think at the end of the day, you know, they had to document obviously the current and the future, what the vision was. They defined all the roles and the responsibilities. They had a lot of process, obviously, and they had lots of assets. So they to manage all of this, what were they going to use? How were they going to use it? When would things come out? And then, of course, there was training. So there was communication and there was training worldwide of how do you take advantage of this? How do you submit requests? What are the SLAs with each of the regions? You've all these languages to deal with. So there was a lot of issues for them to consider in how we did this.
So Kevin, I see one of the things that we have in the results is that we helped create 130 steps or streamlined 130 steps into a unified, repeatable campaign design and development process. That's how far-flung things were, and the left hand really not understanding what the right hand was doing. It was a massive project for that organization.
But they're a very analytical driven organization, and so of course they built in the metrics, which I'm very proud of them for doing that. They wanted the continuous improvement, so they truly did it as a center of excellence.
And I will say that this is one of those projects where change management was incredibly important, because again, when you go in, if you even mention the word reorganize or do something different in a large, more established organization, you know, there's a lot of, you know, anxiety that people have. So they actually had to manage that as well. But all we were doing was taking kind of like a broken system that they have, which wasn't serving anyone well, and streamline that process. And in streamlining that process, gave people new roles and responsibilities that were actually heightened, where they could actually see the accountability. And one of the things that we heard from all the players involved in this is they loved being able to understand what their role was in accountability and to kind of see the end-to-end process versus hoping and praying that this was going to happen and this, you know, it just, because it just was not, it was not structured well. Everybody was deep into their own silo. So seeing them have such an appetite to do this differently. Number one, because it was a, they needed it for the business. And number two, to really focus on their customer, because they were actually quite passionate about their customer.
I'm really glad you brought up change management because one of the things that we see when we go in and help clients do this, we want to interview all the people. We want to understand the existing capabilities and skills of the team that's involved so that we understand if there's gaps in building the COE. And what we tell our sponsors there is send out a communication ahead of time to everybody to say, no, there isn't a big rift coming. This isn't office space, right? We're investing, we're building, we're growing, and we're trying to see where there's pockets of unused talent and capabilities, because we're going to build this fabulous organization that's focused on excellence, and you're going to be part of it. And we're trying to get that information out. And guess what? That's part of change management, right?
So again, I just want to reiterate, when you think about a COE, it can be a dedicated, whereas everybody reports into that COE, or it can act as a, not only provides shared services, but borrows people as part of a shared service as well. And then it's the process that ties these cross-functional groups together. And again, as we all struggle to understand our customer better, this is a fantastic exercise to go through, and it was for them as well.
Yep. So I like to put in, at least one slide that talks about what do you put in there, right? And so if I pick the larger COE, the revenue marketing COE, the question becomes, okay, if I do it for demand generation, do I put in telemarketing in there? Yes, no, maybe. Do I put in program management? Do I put in QA? How far do I draw the line? I'm almost certainly not going to put the content in there, right? They may be their own COE, but and they may in fact keep the website, even though the website is part of demand. You have to figure out where to draw these lines, where to draw the boundaries. And the point is, it has to be very well-defined inputs and outputs between these organizations. What am I going to get from content? What do I give content? I give them questions. I need content. I need assets to do these types of campaigns. The same applies to the field marketing. What sort of requests do they put into me? And what do I send back to them? What reporting and analytics do they get? And then that's the same with over in marketing ops. There's a separate marketing ops groups. Do I take the power users? Does marketing ops take the power users? How do I divide this up? The main point is that COE in the center, it's got to be defined. The boundaries are very crisply defined. I can't have a lot of ambiguity in what inputs I'm going to get. I'm a factory. You can't keep changing the raw materials, right? If you're expecting me to crank things out in 3 days or 5 days, there better not be any ambiguity in the inputs I get for me to have predictable outputs.
That's
so
right.
Define those boundaries really well.
I would add to that, Kevin, that, whatever kind of COE you're thinking about creating, again, the key driver for a COE is you need a maniacal focus to drive a business result. And everyone creates COEs differently. So there's no right, there's no wrong. There is only what works for your business today, because I promise you it'll change in a year or two from now for sure.
Yeah, which means leaving the organization some amount of flexibility.
That's right.
So what are the barriers?
Well, and again, Kevin and I discussed this, and these are things that we see every day: lack of leadership, lack of the right talent, stakeholder fiefdoms, and lack of budget. So let's talk about these. A lot of times when we see an organization developing a COE, we typically see new leadership that has come in, and they've come in with a purpose, not just to do business as usual, but to change something about the business. And so when we see leadership, whether they're new or they're established, if they don't have the vision for the power of a center of excellence or a number of centers of excellence in their organization, I promise you that nothing will happen. And with talent, again, you can create a COE, but if you don't have the talent to deploy into that COE, it's going to be very difficult. We all know about the Great Resignation. We all know about the talent challenges that marketing is facing right now. They are legend. And so again, if you can't put the right talent into play, if you can't find them, and if you can't pay them, and if you can't keep them, then you will not have a successful COE. Why don't you take the last two, Kevin?
Okay. Next steps. So
No, go back.
oh,
Go
the
back.
last two, sorry, on the previous one.
Yeah, just if you could talk a little bit about the last two barriers.
Yeah, I mean,
Stakeholder alignment of
the
budget.
stakeholder fiefdoms, right? Obviously, we've all seen it, and this is almost change management as well. Is people not wanting to give up how many people they manage or which critical functions they manage, and they have to be bought in. And the way to overcome this, obviously, is to do change management type practices at the beginning. You pull them in and you make them part of the solution. So of course, they're going to give up certain things, and they may get other things back. You can't just roll it out on them and surprise them on a Monday morning. Gee, hey, Bob, we're taking half of your people. It's not going to work, right? Because then they're going to be laggards, they're going to drag their feet, and it's going to go slower. So I had one company tell me, oh, our VPs do change management. And that's pretty much synonymous with saying we don't do it and we don't know what it is.
That's right.
You've got to realize that change management is a thing. Somebody should be responsible for it. And you've got to plan major changes like this right from the get-go with change management involved. And then the budget, is it going to be free? You know, you're just shuffling people around. It is likely that once you start to do this and you realize the cost of getting excellence is there's going to be certain skills you don't have. There's going to be certain things you're going to have to go out and outsource, but there may also be certain skills you weren't utilizing yet. So will it cost you more? Probably. But if you're planning on growing anyway, what it's going to get you to do is to hire people in the right roles with the right capabilities that you need to go in this direction so that you will be more productive going forward. And even though you may have incremental costs, you will have substantially greater incremental results.
And Kevin, what I would add to that is, you know, a lot of times developing a COE is a reorganization. And when budgets have already been established, then how do you reallocate those budgets across the different pieces of the business? And that can be quite frightful for an organization to think about doing that, because nobody, you know, it's like the #1 law, never give up your budget, never, ever, ever. And so that's why we put budget as a barrier there, because if you will develop a COE, it is a reorganization, large or small, and it does have to have a budget. So you're going to pull from existing budgets, or you're just going to go off and create a brand new one. Typically, you're going to pull from existing budgets when you do that.
Yep. But it'll be more predictable as to what they need and what the output was. So justifying that budget in years going forward will be a lot easier than a lot of the marketing budget justification. Okay, so one slide just on what it's going to take, what the approach is. You start today, what you do. I mean, obviously paint the picture of where you're going. What's the vision? What's it going to do? How's it going to impact the business? If it does take extra budget, you're going to have to do an ROI. Why is this better? How are you going to be more efficient? Plan that. Then you're going to go back and look at your current state. Obviously, you're going to do gap analysis. You're going to incorporate success factors. You're going to deploy, build, and finally, you're going to come back, sustain, optimize, and measure. So if I go all the way back to define the current state, obviously, you want to do an assessment. What skills, what capabilities do you have? You're going to start to define what should be inside it and should not be inside it to make it very, very crisp in the borders as to how you have the relationships, the interface to the stakeholder groups. You know, build a roadmap. You don't have to do a big bang. You might start with the smaller COE and gradually grow its capability over time. And from a change management perspective, that's probably going to be better. Certainly incorporate success factors, right? And build change management again, build to have early successes. Make it very clear so people can see the traction and see the movement forward. But yeah, build it all in, build in ways of measuring things. You have to build those in. It can't be an afterthought. Build in all the pieces to your process of how you get metrics, and then start to measure it every day, every month. There should be reports on
six little steps, right, Kevin? And yet it can be very challenging to do for all of the reasons that we talked about before. Yet when we see a marketing organization decide they're going to take this maniacal focus by creating and establishing a center of excellence, we just see incredible results. Because again, because if marketers, they're always running around with their hair on fire because there's so many different things to do. And so if you take the time to create a COE where they're very, very maniacally focused, right, you're going to get the result that you need. At least that's what we've seen with many companies, you know, in the years that we've been in the space.
You know, as leaders in our organizations in marketing, we know that we're accountable, but a bigger part of our role is to hold our people accountable, right? And so when you build a COE, you have to ask, what am I holding people accountable for? If you just hold them accountable for doing certain data things, data operations, or doing, issuing a certain number of campaigns, that's what you're going to get. But if you hold them accountable for excellence, if you hold them accountable for improving results month over month, that's what you'll get. So
That's right.
make sure that you drive that accountability down and make them accountable for the things you truly want out of a COE.
Completely agree. And I want to go back to the org charts, and I think Majda, you have a whole set of org charts because we know people love to see org charts because it just gives you an idea of how other people have formed and created their COEs. So I know that Majda and the marketing team can send you guys out a whole set of org charts that you can use when you're thinking about how to create your own COE.
We sure can. Thank you so much, Dr. Debbie and Kevin. I think that was a great session. And those org charts, by the way, are mostly from you and Kevin with all the fabulous work you guys have been doing. We just happened to, brand it and make sure it got to the right folks. So yes, so the B2B marketing org chart lookbook will be available in your follow-up email. So check for that along with your recording and the slides. So at this point, we do have a couple of questions that came in. And if you have everyone who's on the call, feel free to submit your questions as well. But I'll go ahead and just start from the top. And Dr. Debbie or Kevin, feel free to answer. So I think we already answered this question. This came a little bit earlier. So what do you feel are the most common barriers to adopting a more central mindset for our COE? But one thing I like about this question is it having too many silos? We talked about those fiefdoms, but is there any more color commentary you want to give around that, like that mindset shift?
I will provide some commentary on that. If you don't take away anything from this webinar, your fiefdoms and your silos are over. It's done. You will not continue to grow as an organization. You will not be able to succeed in this world that we live in, where it's extraordinarily customer-centric, which requires one view of the customer, and it requires cross-collaboration to the degree of which we have never, ever seen before. So those companies who are going to be digging in and keeping their fiefdoms and their silos, they're going to be behind the 8 ball very, very, very soon.
And I would add to that, one of the ways to get rid of fiefdoms and silos is to give the budget to the people who are closest to driving the goals that marketing has. In other words, building demand. And then those people who are responsible for building demand, let's say it's a COE, they have to turn around and dole out budget to maybe the content folks and to maybe an outside SEO firm or whatever, but they're in control of the budget. That will demolish the fiefdoms, right? Because the money is being guided by, are we achieving these marketing goals?
Hashtag demolish the fiefdoms. I think that's our next tagline for our revenue marketing centers of excellence. Great, thanks guys. Follow-up question to that is, and I can tell this person's trying to figure out, like, how do we do this? How do we get this started? This is something that I've definitely seen with our clients too, is who's the most on board with creating a COE? And then, like, maybe even politically, what are some relationships that marketers need to develop in order to make the COE successful? So again, talking more about the people.
In marketing, it's the CMO, right? And so, CMOs have so many things they have to juggle. It is probably the hardest job in corporate America today. There's a reason why CMOs, have 50% of the tenure of every other executive. They have too many expectations on their plate. So sometimes we go into an organization and the CMO is more about the brand and on that part of the organization versus kind of more in the driving revenue, demand and how marketing operations fuels all that. And so it really is the responsibility of leadership to begin. And we've worked with many organizations who have gone through with leadership as they take a look to reorganize marketing in a way that they can be successful, right? And so we've seen everything from, a pod concept to governance committee concept to COE concept, right? But if there is a business need to reorganize and operate in a certain way, that should be led by leadership.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Debbie. It's got to start with the CMO. One way of thinking it through is who's got the biggest pain that this is going to solve. If you're trying to sell your organization on a COE, what pain are you solving and who has that pain? And it could be the CMO. It could also be that you easily go over and get the CRO, the Chief Revenue Officer, on your side immediately because you say, I can increase our demand without increasing our staffing by X amount if we organize and build a COE for these reasons, and you sell them on that concept.
That's right.
So go to where the pain is.
Love that. That's a great, that's great.
And then we've got one more before we wrap up today. And I think I see this on every single time we talk about COE. This is probably the number one question that comes up all the time. How long? I need this yesterday. So when you look at, so the question is, how long does it take to develop a COE? What sort of expectation, can I bring to the team when we're talking about rolling this out?
It depends, right? It depends on the size of the organization. There are a lot of things that smaller, more agile organizations can do much quicker than a large enterprise organization. And it really has to do with the appetite for change coming from the leadership level as to how quickly. If you're going to have maniacal focus on creating it, and it's coming from the CMO down, and it is, being absolutely positively tied to the business. And again, the best example was our tech pharma supply chain company that was absolutely positively driven by a huge business need. And so it didn't take that long. Whereas others, without that real driver, if it's just a good idea, you'll see that it takes a little bit longer. And how many people are involved, and how much change has to really happen, and how is that change going to take place? Do you have to reallocate budgets? And so the answer varies. But it begins with leadership and an appetite for change and a business reason.
If you're in a business less than $1 billion, 100 million to $1 billion, you can think it through, which is, okay, it's going to take, and you go through those 6 steps. It'll take a month or 2 maybe to get all the stakeholders, the leaders, all in agreement on the vision, the mission, and why they should do it. Then doing your assessment is going to take 3 to 6 weeks because you're going to go through all the resources, the skill sets, what change has to happen. Then you're going to go through 3 or 4 weeks of planning and getting all the stakeholders bought in again. So you see, I'm starting to talk about 3 or 4 or 5 months. And if you're bigger than $1 billion, it could take upwards of a year or more. That's a big.
Absolutely.
That sounds very realistic. All right, well, those were all the questions that I saw in our question bank. Kevin, Dr. Debbie, thank you so much for your conversation today. I definitely learned some things about COE, and I've been looking at this stuff for a couple of years myself, so I really appreciate your insights. And again, as a reminder to everyone on the call or following us on our LinkedIn Live, we will have follow-ups with slides, recordings, and that org chart lookbook if you are registered. So if you're on the LinkedIn Live currently and you want that lookbook and you want these slides, make sure you follow the links to the registration page and we'll make sure you get them. Everyone have a great day.